Welcome to Behind the Sports Medicine Podcast, the podcast that pulls back the curtain on the evolving world of sports science. I'm Andrew Rizza, an athlete trainer with decades of experience in professional, collegiate, and high school sports.
And I'm Cameron Roth, an orthopedic surgeon and a consultant for the Chicago White Sox.
In each episode, we'll explore the real-world challenges and opportunities facing today's human performance professionals.
Our hands-on experience is transforming sports medicine and breaking barriers through innovation and teamwork.
Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Behind the Sports Medicine Podcast. Today we're joined by Emily Perrin, CEO and founder of Perrin Wellness and Performance and co-founder of the Unbroken Athlete. Emily is a nervous system and performance coach and licensed clinical social worker. Emily, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I think it's going to be a great conversation.
Nervous system regulation has become a popular topic in sports performance lately. For listeners who may be hearing that term for the first time, how do you explain what it actually means?
Great question. Yes, it's exploded. And I find a lot of what is on social media in particular isn't always accurate. So I think this is a great conversation. And I always start with just foundationally explaining like what the nervous system is, because we've got a couple. We've got our central nervous system, we've got our peripheral nervous system, our enteric nervous system. So when we talk about nervous system regulation, or when I refer to nervous system regulation, we're talking about the autonomic nervous system, which is a part of the peripheral nervous system, and it has some pretty important jobs. The first one being it's really our, human safety and threat detection system, which is pretty important because I always joke with my athletes. I'm like, you're certainly not going to be playing sport if you're not alive. So like you are pretty happy that you have a nervous system, right? Secondly, it really helps connect the mind and the body. The mind and the body are constantly talking to each other on a feedback loop. The autonomic nervous system is a huge part of that. And then it helps with all involuntary bodily function. So pretty important. And when we're talking about the concept of regulation, what we're not talking about is, being calm and cool and collected and in control 100% of the time. For me, I think regulation is really first and foremost understanding and having an awareness and a relationship with your nervous system. And two, I think regulation is really about, attuning to what our present moment experience is and what the nervous system response that we're having is, and being able to navigate that. And I think a lot of times nervous system regulation is talked about or, talked in the context of, well, we need to regulate the nervous system. We need to regulate the nervous system. And what I think a lot of people are referring to is when, more often than not, when we shift into a protective state, more often than not, the stress response, this concept of regulation is what helps us come out of that and shift back into homeostasis and balance. But really, in my world, I think regulation is actually having the bandwidth and the capacity and the flexibility for the nervous system to do what it needs to do. And sometimes that is be stressed out or shifting to a protective response, right? And to be able to work with that. I talk a lot about the concepts of like flexibility and capacity in my work. And so really regulation, again, first and foremost, I know I'm throwing a lot of words out here, people, but I really, truly think that regulation of the nervous system really starts with understanding and developing a relationship with the nervous system and understanding what it needs in any given moment.
You build recovery plans, rehab protocols, return to sport timelines, because you know outcomes don't happen by accident. Your financial life deserves the same intention. Bode is a fee-only fiduciary firm that starts with a plan. Your goals planning statement, a personalized roadmap that keeps your money aligned with where you're actually headed. Built around your life, backed by conviction. See what real planning looks like at beckbode.com. So how do you make that jump from nervous system regulation to sports performance? Because when we look at the history of sports performance, you think about physical fitness training and now recovery. And even the mental game, people talk about, quote, being in the zone. And people have focused on that for a long time. But how do you make that jump where you take, I'm going to take the autonomic nervous system, parasympathetic and sympathetic, and map it on to sports performance. And I'm actually going to change and improve the sports performance of athletes just based on how they're regulating their nervous system. How do you bridge that gap?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important anytime we're talking about performance or performance enhancement to meet an athlete where they are in their definition of performance enhancement. I think it does no good to come in and say, oh, X, Y, and Z is going to enhance your performance if we're not really starting with what the athlete defines as performance enhancement. So first, I really start with what does the athlete need and what are their wants and goals around performance enhancement. And I think from there, then you start to kind of piece together, right, how the nervous system is involved. So I'll give you an example of an athlete that is recovering from an ACL tear, right? Let's say they're returning to play, right? I mean, their definition of kind of like performance enhancement and getting back out onto the field might be completely different, or I should say their goals at that present moment in their sport journey might be very different than an athlete that's in, peak shape and in peak performance, right, in the middle of the season. So I really prefer to start with like where the athlete is and what their definition of performance enhancement is, and then really get into how does the nervous system get involved. And a lot of times it's really as simple as, well, you don't perform and you certainly don't recover without involving your nervous system, because your nervous system is, first and foremost, right? If we go back to that kind of like safety and threat detection system, it's involved in almost everything you do in life, right? I think in sport, we have for a very long time treated, the physical, technical, tactical conditioning, speed, agility training separate from the mental and emotional side of sport. And the reality is like we just don't work that way. They're constantly intertwined and working together. And so I talk a lot about, rather than performance enhancement, I talk a lot about how do we really build and enhance the relationship between your mind and your body. Because if your mind and your body are really good friends and they're constantly talking to each other, think about, what it means to be like best friends with someone, right? And really close to someone, right? Like you're often on the same wavelength. It's not that you don't have challenges or like get in fights, right? But a lot of times you're walking through life hand in hand. And that's what we want from our mind and our body. And so that's what we're doing when we talk about nervous system work. And the better that your mind and your body are working together, the better your life is going to be, the better your relationships are going to be, the better your recovery is going to be, the better your performance is going to be, all of those things. So that's kind of the in that I take. I do quite a bit of work with athletes navigating injury and chronic pain and repetitive injury. And so I think that the nervous system is a central conversation to recovery, because of the kind of threat and safety piece. You're not going to recover physically, mentally, or emotionally if you're not accessing safety in your mind and your body. And so that's kind of the ticket in as well.
So, for athletes that are listening today, I know we talk a lot about how to do physical medicine for recovery and for injury reduction and risk. What are some of the simple strategies that they can start with today that you might recommend for somebody to help regulate their nervous system?
I think awareness is the first thing. It's I talk a lot with my athletes about building a resilience toolbox. And in my opinion, I think the backbone of the toolbox is awareness of self, of mind, of body, of nervous system. So the first piece is you have to have a basic understanding of the autonomic nervous system, of how it works, what its job is. Sometimes I use the reference of like gears of a car, right? The autonomic nervous system is really pivotal in how we, shift our activation and our energy and our ability to kind of engage in our experience. It's also critical in how we shift in to protect ourselves and meet really challenging experiences and then return and recover from those. I also use the window of tolerance quite frequently, which is a concept by Dan Siegel that really talks about kind of this like window of tolerance that we have as humans, but apply it in a sport and performance context. So I use a lot of those, and I use different ways to educate and to help them conceptualize and understand the nervous system, because when they have that understanding, they're able to really attune to their experience. So that awareness is key. So the education of the nervous system, and then practices, tools, skills, and simply just spending time with yourself, which for a lot of people today in the world that we live in, and for a lot of athletes, that's actually kind of a foreign concept, right? I mean, we've got phones and we've got so much stimulation in the world, and I'm a huge fan of spending time with yourself in ways that don't include technology. I was just at a conference talking about, the flip side of all of the data and the technology that we have and what's the impact of that. So we really need to spend time with ourselves. But, a lot of the practices that we talk about to build awareness, meditation, mindfulness practices, contemplative practices. I'm a trauma therapist, so I do quite a bit of somatic work, right? So body-based practices that really help cultivate an understanding of the body, interoception, proprioception. But I also am a huge fan of emotion regulation. I think that's a huge piece of, I mean, the nervous system is emotion regulation, right? The nervous system plays a critical role in our ability to emote and move through emotions effectively. So, helping athletes build a variety of tools and skills and honestly curiosity around emotions, because I think there's very limited space for that in sport. Sport really doesn't understand emotions and doesn't make a lot of space for them. So, I hit a couple different buckets there, but it starts with kind of this education and understanding of the nervous system, and then there's anything that helps cultivate awareness of the mind, the body, again, mindfulness, contemplative practices, breath work, stuff like that. And then kind of the bucket of like emotion regulation. I think those are some pretty pivotal things. And you can ask me more questions about those and we can get into more like nuanced practices or exercises, but I'll start there.
Yeah, you hit on another one of the buzzwords, resilience. So we hear that all the time in life and in
Hmm.
sport. So what
Hmm.
is resilience? What does it actually mean to you?
I don't know. Good question. No, I'm just kidding. I, what I will say is like, resilience is really complicated. I think there's no one definition, singular definition. If you look across the literature, particularly in trauma literature, like people define it in very different ways. But for me, and what we do at the Unbroken Athlete is we kind of talk about resilience uh, in the context of three R's: regulation, resources, and relationships. So to me, what resilience is I have a flexible and capable mind body system to meet the demands, the challenges of life, and integrate those. And I think one of the things that we really kind of, we don't have to get too trauma heavy here, but I think what is often a misconception, right, is that um, resilience is, or sometimes it's interchanged with like mental toughness, right, and grit. Resilience is this kind of like point or end goal where nothing is a struggle anymore and we are not impacted, we're not affected by things. We are, in control and composed. And that's just not the case. That is not the case ever, because life doesn't stay the same. Life is constantly evolving and changing. And so I think resilience is really the ability to meet the fact that life is never the same and we literally never know what's going to happen when we wake up, right? Or when we go to bed at night. And so having, again, a mind body system that has the capacity and the flexibility to meet that, and to move through it and to integrate it, so that it's not overwhelming our system on a consistent basis. That's to me what resilience is.
And you're also a licensed trauma therapist, and I actually think this is the perfect setting to discuss a little bit of that because many people associate trauma with major life events, but actually trauma can show up in a lot of different ways. So how do you define trauma within the context of sport?
I mean, I don't think I define it differently in sport than I do in my work as a trauma therapist. I think trauma, we have to move beyond trauma being an event. Trauma is an experience, a response within the mind and the body, to something that overwhelms our system. It overwhelms our capacity, our resources, our agency in the moment to integrate the experience. And what I think a lot of people don't understand is what overwhelms one person may not overwhelm another, right? And there's a lot of reasons for that. I talk pretty frequently about how resilience and being able to move through really difficult experiences is not just an individual thing. It's very dependent on what we call like contextual factors. I'm a social worker, right? So I'm always kind of thinking about like what we call macro level factors, which are these like really larger systemic pieces that very much trickle down to the individual and that individual's ability to handle things. Then we have our meso level factors, which are the kind of like mid tier. These think about these as like cultures, environments. These are sport organizations, they are sport teams, right? And then we come down into the micro, which is, what sport is classically defining as, what is a person doing in the moment? What tools are they using? In terms of physical health, what is the person eating? What are they putting in their bodies? Like those are micro level factors, right? That are very dependent on I mean, the biggest one being, do you have access to adequate resources that can help you handle really hard stuff, right? Unfortunately, we have a healthcare system that, doesn't allow everyone to move through things at the same speed. And I think sport doesn't really acknowledge that. And it very much shows up in sport. And I think the other thing is that, you know, I think we also need to really understand that trauma um, doesn't look like anything, and it can look like everything, and that's what I think is really challenging. We know that one of the most pervasive forms of trauma is emotional neglect in like really core pivotal developmental years. It's not, and I'm not saying that the big P's that we often think of as trauma aren't trauma. They understand, they absolutely are. They can be for many people. We also know that people move through very traumatic, what we call big T experiences, and they have the capacity, they have a nervous system, they have the support system, right, to actually integrate that experience, and they are not traumatized. They do not walk away from that experience and have, post traumatic stress or anything, right? Again, so much of it really depends on, right, the human, their contextual factors, and to be fair, a huge part of it is the flexibility that they have in their nervous system and the support that they have around them.
So, are there ways that traditional sports environments unintentionally create stress, fear, or unhealthy coping patterns? And if so, as healthcare providers, how do we change that?
Yeah, I mean, oh my gosh, yes. I mean, to be fair, I think any environment, right, can both, you know, unintentionally and intentionally cause harm. And I think it's important that we understand that intention and impact are not the same thing. We can have all the right intentions in the world and the impact is not there, right? And I think one of the things we have to really look at in sport and sport culture is, in my opinion, these macro level factors. A youth sports system that, in my opinion, um, I don't know what words I want to use, but I think causes a lot of problems. I think the pay to play model is an issue. I think the fact that we have a culture, and again, a youth sport culture that starts very, very young, that is obsessed with winning, um, creates a lot of issues, can create a lot of harm. I think there's a lot of things happening at the collegiate level that are trickling down and creating potential harm. I think I haven't spent much time at the organizational level in pro sports, but I've worked with plenty of pro athletes. I think things like schedules and demands and social media, all of these things, absolutely. And I don't necessarily know if I have an answer. I think one of the things that we need to, if we really want to get on the more proactive side, and I think this also very much ties into like athlete centered care, and the conversations around mental health and advocacy for players. I think we really have to take a hard look at these macro level and system pieces. I personally don't think we have a youth sports system that is sustainable at this rate. And I also think we don't have a youth sports system that even creates space for people to just simply engage in sport, which is like such a beautiful thing, right? To just be able to be on a team and move your body and have fun and engage in play. Like there's not a lot of room for that. There's not a lot of space for kids in particular to experience that, because it is so heavily based in kind of the pay to play and the pipeline to college sport right now, and there's a lot of pressure and expectation around that. And so I think there's also a lot of kids out there across the country that are not even getting to engage in sport, and I think that's harmful. I really do. So yeah, I mean, I think we have to look at the system, the structure of sport. I also think that one of the things is, and maybe I'll be a little brave and bold in saying this, but I think a lot of times within organizations, and I think you see it across all levels, youth, high school, college, pro, I think you often have people making decisions about athlete and player well-being that don't really understand athlete and player well-being, and who, you know, who's on the receiving end of that? The athletes, the players. So I think we also probably need to do a better job of um, putting people in positions who are making really critical decisions around athlete player well-being, that want to understand what that actually means and what's required of the organization. I mean, I think finances are probably going to be an issue as well. Again, all levels. I think we can come up with the most extravagant, plans to support and enhance player well-being. If we don't have the money to carry it out, then it's not going to go anywhere. I think we're also just probably far too reactive. So I think we see this a lot at the collegiate level is that, I think we've done a great job of creating more mental health awareness and getting clinicians in behavioral health departments. But I'm sorry, you can't tell me that one behavioral health clinician to 600 student athletes is going to move the needle. It's just, it's not possible, right? And so how do we start to move beyond just, again, the individual approach to athlete well-being and care, and move beyond to a more kind of meso or macro level approach to be more proactive, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I want to go back to you. You said, one thing that was interesting was pay to play. And we had just interviewed Erica Mulholland. She's a former All-American soccer player. John Hopkins was former.
I just spent the whole weekend with Erica.
So we chatted with Erica, so you know her. So I think one of the things we talked about is like what is happening with youth sports. And the key word or buzzword is, you're dealing with parents that are, paying for these athletes to play, but it's private equity money that's funding a lot of this.
Mm-hmm.
And how are we going to change it? How can we turn it around for the well-being of the athlete? How can coaches and organizations maintain accountability and competitive excellence while still prioritizing athletes' well-being?
I think it's okay to say, I don't know. I don't have an answer. I think we probably need more people in the world that are willing to do that. I don't have a perfect answer. I think that it's going to be multifaceted. It's not just going to be one thing. However, do I think actually some of the things that we're talking about here in this episode, are they relevant? Meaning, right? Do I actually think that a huge part of this is helping sport become more what we might call trauma informed? 1000%. I do. Because to me, at a fundamental level, I think what it means to be trauma informed is to really just zoom out your perspective around what it means to be human and what has the potential to impact human beings. And I think it shifts you into a more, not just empathetic, experience with human beings, and for coaches, particularly like the athletes that you're working with, but it's actually more empowering long term because it actually helps coaches understand what's going on with athletes and how to actually meet an athlete where they are and empower them to grow and to be competitive and to excel, right? And tap into their full potential. I really do believe that. Yeah, I mean, I think this is it's not just an organizational problem, meaning like the sport organization. I think parents have to play a role here. Maybe one of the biggest roles, if I'm being honest. And I'm not a parent, so I'm not going to pretend that I know all the ins and outs of that. But I think parents play a role here. And I to be fair, it goes back a little bit to kind of a couple things that I was saying earlier. But I also think that this is not just a youth problem. I mean, I think if we come at this from just trying to overhaul the youth system, I think we're going at it wrong. I think there's massive things happening at the college level that are inherently impacting the youth game that we have to take into consideration. Pro might be a little bit of its own thing, but I think we have to understand where sport as a whole is going across all levels: college, high school, youth, all the above. And bring a lot of different parties together to come at the problem from a couple different angles, if I'm being honest.
What role does team culture play in this?
Well, I mean, where does team culture come from? How is team culture formed? I mean, it's not just formed from the players. It's also not just formed from the coaches. I mean, I think at the youth level, parents, I mean, I coached at the youth level I started coaching camps when I was 14 years old. And picked up 2 club teams when I was still in college. I mean, I coached at the youth level for over 10 years. And I will tell you right now that I always included parents in meetings, in conversations. They were involved because I wanted them to know what the expectations, the standards, and the boundaries were, right? They're very much a part of that. So yeah, I mean, I think you have to take a step back and look at, well, how is team culture formed? And look at all the parties that are involved in that. And I mean, yeah, it's a huge part of this. I think it's kind of one of those where my social work brain always goes back to like the layers, right? The micro, the macro, or excuse me, the meso and the macro level factors. And you can even put that in like a youth sport context, right? So like the micro is just the individual athlete. Well, that individual athlete doesn't just show up to practice and um, a coach can't just worry about that individual athlete. Who's that individual athlete going home to every night, right? What's happening in the home, right? How are the parents involved in what the athlete is doing at practice every single day? Then how does that impact, the team culture, right? How is that impacted by the sport organization? I mean, I think there's a lot of different layers. And I think, again, we can do all we want, right, for the individual athlete. You can only do so much if the macro level factors or the organizational level factors are not conducive to things like athlete well-being. And I mean, let's take something like, a process-driven model. If you're a coach that is trying to coach a team around the process and the journey and growth and development, but you are in a club or you're in a sport organization that is focused on the outcome, you can only do so much, right? So I think we have to think about all of these things. I don't really know. I mean, I think I would be really interested if I had the time and the bandwidth and the energy, which I don't right now in my life, but maybe one day I will. I think it would be fascinating to go across the United States and sit with a bunch of different sport organizations and see how they move every single day, see how they speak with each other, see how they interact. I don't know if you guys saw all the stuff about Norway. Or within the Olympics, following the Olympics, right, around their sports system. Obviously, the United States is not Norway, right? But I find this stuff really interesting, and I think we're only going to get better. Our systems are only going to get better. Our organizations are only going to get better if we get really curious about all this and we proactively engage in conversations and we're willing to learn and we're willing to do things differently, possibly. It's a tall task. I don't know if everybody's willing to do that, but I think it would be really fun, interesting to kind of, as I was saying, go and sit in with a bunch of different organizations and see how everybody does things. I think we would learn a lot.
It's a great idea, and it's a future project we should look into.
You guys lead the way. You tell me where and when to show up, and I'll try to be there.
I think that'd be fascinating. I think it'd be very revealing on what happens, and we'd find a lot of similarities, I think, in mindset, but you'd see some differences and be able to suss out what the right way forward is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My dad coached college basketball at UVA for over 15 years and has a PhD in sports psychology and works primarily with like head coaches. So a lot of his work is, sitting in with coaching staffs, and I've learned a lot from him, and we have, pretty extensive conversations around how humans work, how teams work. He's worked with I think like 6 or 7 head coaches collegiately that have won national championships. And so he has a very interesting perspective and kind of into working with many different leaders who have been highly successful, particularly in sport. And you're exactly right. Like, Cam, I think you hit on something really important, which is like, yeah, I mean, I think you're going to find some similarities, right? These kind of like what we might call like key traits, right? Of like really successful leaders and successful components, like what we call interpersonal dynamic. But we'd also probably find some drastic differences, right? That would really pique curiosity and kind of get us thinking. So anyways, we might have gotten off tangent there, but.
Oh, that's great.
One of the things that I find very interesting is that I work with a lot of youth athletes and I've done it for 30 years. And I'm always, talking to athletes when they get injured about how they keep their head in the game, how we keep them involved with their teams, even if they're injured, how they can help coach young athletes that are coming up. But behavior is learned. Like these youth athletes are learning it from somewhere. They're either learning from parents or from coaches or their peers.
Yeah.
So how do you guys just talked about this, like going and listening to coaches and seeing how their success is bringing success to those athletes and bringing those championships. And it's the same working in the regular work environment when you're working with someone next to them day in and day out.
Hmm.
It's what you're doing is help motivating them, but also their behaviors are reflective of what you are doing at work. So I think it kind of goes hand in hand.
Yeah. Yeah. And I always like something I talk to my coaches pretty frequently about is like the concept of co-regulation. So like if we bring the nervous system back into this, right? Like humans are wired to connect and interact with other humans, and our nervous systems engage and interact with other nervous systems. I mean, basically how we're biologically wired, right? Because when we're born into the world, we don't speak English, right? What do we speak? The language of the nervous system, right? Our nervous system is communicating with our caregiver's nervous system the moment that we're born, and that doesn't stop, right? And so what I think is really important for both parents, because I work with a lot of parents too, and coaches to really understand is that your athlete's nervous system is constantly being impacted by what your nervous system is. So I think one of the most fundamental things we can do for our athletes, particularly if we're talking about the concept of resilience and helping our athletes be resilient and successful in sport, is regulate our own nervous systems. Coaches and parents have a responsibility to do that. And if you don't know how to do that, because the reality is many adults in the world are walking around and they don't know how to regulate their own nervous system because they were never taught, right? That is something that we learn from our caregivers, and as you said, right, and then the people that are in our lives and our peers and all of that. But I think a huge piece of this, particularly at the youth level, is both parents and coaches really understanding that, well, if we want resilient athletes, and we want athletes that can continuously grow and develop and enhance their performance and be competitive, and handle really tough stuff in life, we have a huge responsibility in that, coaches and parents. And a huge piece of the equation is being able to regulate your own system so that you can model how to be resilient. You can model how to effectively navigate challenges, and emotions and all the above. And unfortunately, I mean, I don't know if you guys follow. I think it's like Youth Sports Inc. or something. He's like a professional football player, and he has a podcast and he interviews a bunch of parents and people, and they just show clips upon clips of parents just absolutely having meltdowns on the sidelines and screaming at the refs, and I mean getting in fights in the parking lot. And I'm just sitting here thinking like, and we wonder why our kids are struggling so deeply.
And they act the
Right?
way they do.
You're right. So, I think I'm in the midst of building out some resources for parents because a lot of my work has shifted into working with parents and coaches. And I think this is a real problem and a real piece to the equation.
Oh, I have so many questions. It's Greg Olson who hosts the
Yes. Thank you. Yeah.
podcast.
Yeah.
Greg Olson.
So he would be awesome. So we're going to get him on and talk to him. That would be fascinating. So you may have already answered it, but speaking of parents, what advice would you give parents who are trying to support young athletes dealing with stress, anxiety, and performance pressure?
Learn how to navigate your own anxiety and stress. I'm being dead serious.
All right.
I'm being dead serious. Yeah, I mean, it's mind-boggling to me because I don't know why we expect an 8, 9, 10, a 15-year-old to figure out how to do all the regulating, particularly when it comes to the emotion and the pressure and the stress that come with sport and performance. Like, I mean, even just looking at like the adolescent brain, people like our prefrontal cortex, as we know, are not fully formed. Like a teenager does not have, right, the emotion regulation skills within themselves at that point. Now, they may have some, right, but they don't have all of them. And so I think parents really need to, one, first and foremost, like, um, I think parents need to learn about their autonomic nervous system and learn about emotion regulation and really take a hard look at what their relationship is with stress and anxiety and emotions, and understand that your child's ability to handle pressure and expectation and performance related anxiety and all those things really starts with your ability to stay grounded and present for your child in those moments. Okay. And I'm also a huge fan of co regulation. Go into the process with them. Like, don't, throw out a breathing technique or a coping skill and say, oh, you should try this. Do it with them, right? Like, pull up to the game, 20 minutes early, turn around, get in the back seat with them, right? Like, hold their hand, go through the breathing practices, go through the grounding, go through that with them, join them in the experience. I think there is something really, really monumental in that. And I think a parent's ability to, again, stay really grounded, stay really present in their body. As an athlete might be moving through some things, I think the kind of the number one thing I see with parents a lot of times is their desire to fix. As soon as an athlete gets, you know, and trust me, like my parents are the same way, and I'm 35 years old, right? Like there's a problem, kid is in distress, they're really nervous, and the parent wants to go in and fix, right? The reality is there's very little you can actually fix or solve for your child, particularly when it comes to sport and performance. The goal is not to fix or solve. It is to show up, be present, say, I'm here, I'm not going to leave you. This may suck, but I'm going to be in it with you, right? And let's work together, right? To navigate this, right? Whatever that looks like. So I think that's the biggest one. And I think parents, need to go on their own journey with a lot of that, because we're never done learning about that stuff. I'm a huge fan. Like, I think parents, it's not enough to like ask our kids or athletes to get really curious about their emotions or their nervous system or, performance enhancement techniques if we're not willing to do that ourselves. I think parents need to be lifelong learners in this journey with their kids.
I think it's being, again, supportive, and then what the child wants. It's not what the parent wants. I think too many times we see it's what the parent wants to make themselves feel like they've accomplished something. And every time I talk to an athlete, they're like, I'm so done. My parents are pushing me. And you have to come to a discussion on what's best for the athlete.
Yeah, really, that's so interesting. And I've had so many conversations about this with my mentor, who's really guided me through a lot of my trauma work. But, I think parents sometimes lose sight of the fact that a kid's brain and concept of like commitment and work ethic and drive isn't the same as an adult. Actually, it's pretty typical for a kid to wake up and be like super into soccer one day and be like, I'm going to be the next Messi, right? And then the next day they're like, I don't want to do that. I want to go to art. Like, that's actually really normal. But like a lot of times parents actually shame their kids, right, for that. And what they're doing in turn is kind of cutting off that ability to explore and be excited about a lot of different things. And I think that's actually, it's not even getting me started on the like early sports specialization. And I don't have kids yet, but I like can't wait to like throw my kids into just like the most random stuff and be like, what do you like? What do you want to do? Like, I just think exploration is like the name of the game. And I think a lot of times because parents don't really understand that that's how their brain is trying to make sense of themselves and the world around them. And that's actually really good. It's a really good thing, right? And more so like, how can we help them continue to get curious about that while also providing like the gentle guidance of like, yeah, okay, so like here's the deal, right? Like when you sign up for something like, a travel soccer team or, we say that we're going to commit to things, right? Like this is what it looks like, right? And help them step into that understanding rather than kind of like shame them right away. And I think that's a really pivotal piece of the equation as well. I think there's a balance to everything, but I do think that that's a big part of it.
Yeah, and a conversation for another day is what pushes a lot of this is the price of admission for college. Let's be real.
Yeah.
That does challenge a lot of people, but
100%.
So we have this thing called the lightning round.
Great. Can't wait.
Questions, quick answer, no holes barred,
Okay.
and it's a lot of fun.
Okay.
So, Cam, do you want to start?
Yeah, so this was going to be a longer answer question, but let's see if you can make it nice and tidy with the lightning round.
All right.
So for athletes and parents trying to become more self-aware, how can they start paying attention to their thoughts, emotions, and physical responses without becoming overwhelmed?
I will shorten this, but it does require probably like an hour-long conversation. But I think developing the skill of what I call the pause is huge. I think even just understanding that a lot of times we have more time, we have more space than we think we do. I think we have become a really kind of automatic society where there's overstimulation, there's a sense of constant urgency. So it's like, oh my gosh, like as soon as something happens, it's like I've got to respond. And the reality is like a lot of times we have more time, and we certainly have time for a breath, 2 breaths more often than not. And so I think simply, Viktor Frankl has a beautiful quote, right? Like between stimulus and response, there's a space, and that space is our power to choose our response, and in our response lies our freedom, right? And so learning how to create that space, I think is a huge one.
What's one daily habit you never skip?
Sleep hygiene.
Love it. Love to sleep.
Great
I've been
answer.
an insomniac for
That's
most
a
of my life,
huge,
so
huge. Yeah, that's a great
yeah.
answer.
All
Yeah.
right, expand it. Give me 10 seconds of your sleep hygiene routine.
So I have been an insomniac for most of my life. I don't sleep well. I would say usually by 8:15, we're off all technology. We're reading, lights are dim, phone is definitely off. Take some magnesium, vagus nerve stimulator.
Wow.
Yep.
So you
And
don't
then
you don't
a
drink
lot of
coffee at 8 o'clock at night?
no, absolutely not. And then it's, I kind of move through a variety of practices, breath work, meditation, restorative yoga, kind of just like what my vibe is at the moment. But yeah, it's typically anywhere from it can be 45 minutes to an hour.
Love it.
Sweet. We have the same routine. Eye mask, earplugs,
Yeah.
magnesium.
White noise machine
You
times
got
2.
it.
Yeah.
You got it.
I can sleep standing up. I don't have a problem, luckily. So.
What book has had the biggest influence on your work?
Oh my gosh, you guys, that's a hard question. Let me look at um my grandmother's hands by Resme Meneka. I always say his name wrong. Meneka. I need to know how to say his name. Fantastic,
Resma
beautiful work.
Menachem.
Menachem, yeah. Trauma sensitive mindfulness is a really good one. I also think Real Love by Sharon Salzberg. I usually read that about once a year. She's a meditation teacher. I did a self compassion practice 365 days for an entire year in like the early days of some of my own recovery, and yeah, it was pretty influential.
Was that a meta practice or was that
Yeah, part of it. Yep. Yeah, there's a couple different ways to do like a meta meditation. You can also do just like you don't have to go through the kind of like full 4 phrases of self and the world and a loved one, but yeah, you can play around with it. But yes,
What's one misconception about mental health in sports you'd love to eliminate?
that it's separate from anything else. I'll be honest, like I don't. It's not that I'm steering away from using the term mental health. Mental health is very important, but like, I mean, I think we operate too siloed. Like we just kind of tend to treat things all in these like individual buckets when the reality is like, I mean, let's take the connection between sleep and mental health, right? Um, Stuff like that. I everything is impacting everything. And I think sport doesn't always make nuance for that or really understand the connection and the relationship between all these things, the mental, the physical, the social, right? The relational piece. So I would say that, mental health isn't this like ethereal, like added thing. It's integrated into everything that humans do.
what's your favorite way to regulate your nervous system?
Well, it depends. And I think this again is another misconception because regulating your nervous system very much depends on what protective state that you're in. We have our main kind of sympathetic and parasympathetic, but within that, I mean, and a lot of different theories in nervous system science. I mean, there are some people that say we have up to 6, 7 nervous system states, right? And so, what I think is really important to understand is that what protective state you are in determines what regulation tools or skills you're using. I think there's a lot of people like, let's take, for example, just deep breathing, right? I mean, well, if you are in what we call more of a collapse or a shutdown, so that is it's actually a protective state. The parasympathetic nervous system comes on and kind of starts to shut the body down. Deep breathing is just going to exacerbate that. It's just going to shut your system down more. So we don't want to deep breathe. We actually want to bring a little bit of mobilization to the system. So that's going to depend. So if that was kind of where I was at, what I would really need to do is actually very slowly stand up and slowly start to kind of rhythmically move my body, right, to bring that mobilization into my system so that I return back to a regulated state. If I'm in a stress response, I'm in, more of kind of a panic, that sympathetic drive. Deep breathing might help, but I also know a lot of people that put themselves more into a panic attack by deep breathing when they're trying to do that, right? So I think it depends. I can't give you an answer. I'm going to give you a nuanced answer, which is it depends. I would say, we also need to be thinking about regulation of the system as an ongoing proactive thing. Regulation is not just when we've shifted into a protective response, right? regulation is how we live our lives, right? So, I think, really just having a daily kind of routine and rhythm to my life and my day is probably the biggest piece. But I think also relationships is another one, right? Like having people, that co-regulation piece leads way to the self-regulation. So like having loved ones and people that you talk to every single day, and you can send you some stupid meme and all of a sudden you're laughing and having a moment of connection, right? So I think connection as well.
Love it. Last question. For someone listening today that may be struggling with stress, anxiety, or mental health challenges or performance pressures, what's the message you'd want them to hear?
There's nothing wrong with you.
That's perfect.
Probably the biggest one.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with you. I think a lot of athletes shift into those experiences, and a lot of them do have the tools and the skills. They have a toolbox of some things, and then they still experience those, and they think something's wrong with them. I think the biggest myth that we've sold athletes is that, again, being mentally tough, being resilient is getting to this place where you never struggle with things, you never get anxious, you never get to a place where you're overwhelmed, and that just couldn't be farther from the truth. There is nothing wrong with you if you have all the tools and the skills, but you still hit a point where you're anxious or you're frustrated or you are feeling stressed out or overwhelmed, right? You're just human. And you're not doing yourself any favors by thinking that there's something wrong with you or beating yourself up. It's just kind of what it means to be human, and you're not alone in that. And, I think the best thing you can do is take a deep breath and then kind of go, okay, what do I need right now? How do I navigate this?
Awesome. Emily, thank you again for joining us tonight. That this was a great conversation. Hopefully we can continue it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Emily. Incredibly illuminating. I already have those books that you recommended in my library queue ready to go, and we'll debrief them later. Thanks for listening to Behind the Sports Medicine Podcast. Follow us on social media and check out our website.
The information shared on this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and is not intended as medical advice. Please consult a licensed healthcare provider for guidance related to your specific situation. We'll see you next week.